everyone. Thank you again for joining us. It is a small group with us today because we are gearing it to First Work members, First Work organizations. This is something, Launchpad Train the Trainer is something we are very invested in. We wanted to really put the work in around this, and Danielle Olson will talk a bit more about it because she has helped, like through focus groups and through engaging our members, helped create a program that we're hoping to run this coming in the coming months. She's going to talk about it further, and given the fact, and I think that most of you have heard about the memo from the ministry where they, although they're lifting restrictions from the lockdown, it's very much engage with your clientele through different delivery methods. And something that we want to talk about is a deeper dual customer focused engagement. So I'm going to, without any further conversation from me, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle Olson to kick this off. Right over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Kos, and to the First Work team. I'm sorry, everybody. We had some technical problems this morning, so thanks for your patience. You got to see us in action there at the beginning, troubleshooting. So as Akosua said, I'm going to tell you more about the Launchpad program and specifically the Train the Trainer pilot that we're going to be kind of kicking off in a couple of weeks in partnership with First Work. So this is a program that is exclusively being offered to First Work members. So I'm going to take you through kind of what the program is, what the genesis of it is, what the goals of it are, how it's going to actually run, what our hopes and expectations for it are. And then there'll be time for live questions. But in the meantime, if you have any questions as I'm going, I'm looking at the chat. Feel free to put the questions in the chat, and you can put them in also to all panelists and attendees, so everyone can see them, because I'm sure other folks will have similar questions, and we'll get those questions answered for you as well. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Danielle Olson, and my background is very much workforce development. I ran a sector-based training organization for a number of years in Toronto, focused on the hotel industry for both unemployed folks, largely social assistance recipients, as well as incumbent workers. And then since then, worked for the provincial government in a policy capacity, and have been working with groups since then to help them design and then implement programming based on really what we know, like what the evidence tells us works. And we have a fair understanding of the kind of key program components that contribute to outcomes, particularly for vulnerable people. And that's really kind of what's underlining or the foundation of this program. So I'm going to get into it, and you have to excuse me, I'm using PDF here, so it's a little bit clunky. So what is it? The pilot itself is a Train the Trainer program of a specific program that we have created, which we're calling Launchpad. And Launchpad itself is based on a number of program design best practices that are very much sort of the foundation of the evidence base within workforce development. So these key program elements include a dual customer design. So often this will be called like demand driven, sometimes sector specific, but really it's workforce programs that are designed to meet the needs of specific employers, potentially employers in one industry, in order to address structural barriers in the labor market for low income and disadvantaged people. Typically with a skills training component, with the goal of supporting people to achieve sustainable outcomes, sustainable employment outcomes, and ideally career pathways, but at minimum sustainable employment. The program that we've designed, which we're calling Launchpad, also builds on adult learning best practices that are very complementary and synergistic to the workforce development best practices that I'm going to get into, as well as program design and delivery methods, some of which we've talked about before, such as cohort-based training, very applied experiential programming. Thank you, Scott. I will talk a bit more about what dual customer means. Thanks for that question. As well as the other two elements are coaching and non-clinical tools, specifically to support clients to achieve kind of cognitive and behavioral change that will support them to achieve their goals and to sustain kind of momentum and direction towards their goals, as well as trauma-informed program design and delivery practice, recognizing that a significant portion of the clients that we work with in community-based programming have experienced trauma. So that's kind of what the program is itself. And I should also say that it's Launchpad itself is both structured and customizable. So there are specific structured components that will have certain sort of like quality standards associated with them, and those are based on best practice. So the folks who participate in the Train the Trainer, and I'll get into this, will be trained on a series of very specific tools and methods that are basically the backbone of the program. However, it's also highly customizable, particularly based on the demand side or the employer industry group that you're going to be working with, as well as to a degree the populations that you work with and the geography that you're in the province, because different geographies and regions will have both different economies, of course, as well as different issues related to transportation and housing and things like that. To your question, Scott, dual customer basically means that the workforce program or the employment and training program views the employer and the job seeker as equal customers. And specifically related to the design, that the program seeks to address the workforce needs of both the employers and the job seekers. And so sometimes you'll hear this be described as demand driven. I personally prefer dual customer, even though it's jargony and we should come up with a better name, because we don't want to just serve employers as an end in itself. We seek, like, the objective or the reason to customize an intervention to meet the needs of employers is because it's the best way. It's among the best ways to actually serve and connect our client group to good jobs. So that's kind of core to the how we design the specific kind of employment and training content, and also how we engage with employers on the front end before we actually start designing the program. Okay. So I just talked a little bit about this. I want to make sure I didn't skip a slide. Yeah. So in terms of these best practices, I just talked more about dual customer. Sometimes these programs are, as I said, sector specific. There's a fair amount of research about this, and I know many of you are familiar with it and are sort of testing it in different ways in your agencies. The province has been interested in this approach for the last several years, and it has also underpinned the Skills Advance Ontario program design. So some of you may be familiar with Skills Advance. There are a number of these sort of program pilots. They're still, I think, being described as pilots in Ontario right now. And that program was very much informed by an initiative in the United States called Work Advance. And Work Advance was a national initiative that individual programs focused on the workforce needs of specific sectors with the goal of serving and connecting low-income vulnerable people to, again, sustainable quality jobs. And there was initially a 3-year control group study done where job seekers, basically they recruited twice the number of people into these programs, but only half of them went through the intervention and the other half were allowed to go into other employment and training programs. And they found that participants who went into sector-specific programs had higher wages and worked more hours over the course of 3 years than participants who went into kind of more general employment and training. So that's among the studies that have sort of underpinned this research. And I can share more with you about that in the Q&A that we're going to send out tomorrow. It also, the program design really builds on applied adult learning best practices. So we know that most adults learn most effectively by doing. This is especially true when it comes to vocational training or employment-specific training. We both learn more quickly and build our applied skill, but we also build confidence. Confidence kind of in our own ability, and confidence as it relates to a specific industry or occupation that we're focusing on. And that's where the adult learning best practices very much dovetail with workforce kind of programming, design, and delivery. So there's some other program elements that have been found to reinforce that, such as cohort-based models, the role of staff, program staff specifically, to play a role as kind of supportive coaches and mentors for staff. And this kind of combination of program elements will generally have a positive impact on participants' self-efficacy and confidence, and also support their retention in the program and their retention and their resilience after the program once they're in employment. In the Launchpad program, we're also including specific non-clinical self-regulation tools for clients, as well as coaching tools for staff. Recognizing that for a lot of folks, both due to histories of trauma, as well as just kind of different life experiences, as people, we develop habits and patterns, and these are both habits in terms of how we behave, but also in terms of how we think and what we expect. And when we have, and this is also based on neuroscience, our habits are actually hardwired into our neural pathways, and that's when something is a reaction versus a response. It's actually involuntary. So a lot of the practices, non-clinical practices, to support people and provide people with more tools and power over these habits are related to awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and actually even our bodies. So we're going to build those tools into the program, or we have built those tools into the program as well. So agencies will be trained on specific tools that they can use with clients, as well as coaching methods based on those best practices. And really, what's our goal with doing this? Akosua spoke a little bit about this when she kicked us off. In many ways, this program is an experiment, but it's one that we are very excited about. So our motivation is of course to connect people in the community, really with a focus on folks who are at the margins of the labor market, to in-demand jobs, and ideally good in-demand jobs. That's another component of either sector strategies or demand-driven strategies, that you can strategically target the industries that you're gonna focus on, or the jobs you're gonna focus on, to help people get into better quality jobs. We also seek to really build sustainable skills to support confidence and self-efficacy for people to continue to have, healthy, empowered futures, so that our interventions stick and support, really provide the people that we serve with a strong foundation that will carry them, carry them forward in a sustained way after the specific program intervention. And then as a team, and I'll tell you a little bit about the team that I'm working with First Work, we really seek to scale best practice and to also learn from the field and from practitioners. Akoso has said that I've been, or I held some focus groups over the last week in partnership with First Work that some of you participated in. And as you would know, if you were in any of those focus groups, there's already great work happening in the field now, and we seek to build on that. So part of the Train the Trainer will also build on the wisdom of the cohort group of participating agencies. And then after we actually test the program, which I'll get into, we want to continue to work with the participating agencies to monitor and capture knowledge about what's working. Ooh. Here we go. So how are we going to do it? So the Train the Trainer itself is a 4-week intensive. We're calling it a boot camp. In the course of 4 weeks, participating agencies will be taught both the design methodology of the program. So that's everything from how to design the dual customer kind of dual customer tenants, from how to engage with employers to how to design industry-specific curriculum, screening and assessment for participants, as well as all the way through to specific delivery methods and modules. So in some cases, the tools are modules that agencies will be trained on how to deliver with their clients. In other cases, they're going to be methodologies related to either curriculum development or coaching. And in all cases, the participating agencies will receive the theory, some kind of research behind the theory and the tool, the actual tool itself, and then within the 4-week course, will be trained and given an opportunity to test it and to model it. So in some cases, you're actually going to be designing your program. So when it comes to curriculum, screening and selection, modules, you will be designing while you're in the 4-week program. And then when it comes to the tools, you'll be given an opportunity to actually test the tools with your colleagues who are also being trained. And then after the 4-week period, when you actually move into delivering your program, which of course starts with recruitment at intake, there will be an ongoing implementation coaching element for another 8 weeks, I believe. It's 8 or 12 weeks. And then following that, with First Work, we're going to continue monitoring and data collection, again, to really support that ongoing learning related to how effective we are with this pilot. So the criteria for agencies, we are offering this for no charge to First Work members. The value, First Work has the ability to pilot this in conjunction with another project. So it was a great opportunity that we wanted to take advantage of, particularly for the reasons Akoso mentioned, related to the obviously COVID, but also the direction that the province is moving, both related to the SSMs and a broader focus on sort of aligning demand and supply in the labor market, or this dual customer approach. So this is very much a pilot, and it's also, we recognize that it's a very kind of quick ramp up period. So for that reason, we are looking to pilot Launchpad and the Train the Trainer with 5 to 10 agencies. So that's sort of the number of participating agencies that already have existing employer relationships. And the reason for this is that employer engagement process really does take time. It can take months. And based on the time frame that we're working with, we need to sort of be able to start the design process relatively immediately. So one of the criteria are that agencies already have existing employer relationships. They don't necessarily have to have a designed program, but they have to have a sense of the employers or the industry that they would want to work with. There will be tools and processes to support you to dive deeper with those employers and to interview them and gain deeper knowledge and kind of do an analysis. But those relationships really do need to be established. If you already have a program designed, that's great. We can build on that with Launchpad, but that is not a requirement. But the existing kind of industry relationships and that practice within the agency is a requirement. Maybe one thing to maybe go back a step, actually. In some cases, agencies are already focused on particular sectors, but they may work with another intermediary. So in some cases, agencies that work with very vulnerable youth provide pre-employment programming, and then they refer those youth to another kind of intensive vocational training program that does work directly with industry. So if you are already working with kind of an industry intermediary, and this is described on FirstWorks website, that's also okay. So we consider that similar to working directly with employers, although it's different. And I can talk a little bit more about that if there are questions at the end. We are looking for participating agencies to commit 2 or 3 staff for 4 weeks. And we know that's a big commitment. Our reason for requesting a minimum or requiring a minimum of 2 staff is really because it takes at least 2 staff to deliver a program, and also for a minimum of 2 staff, typically more. Also for sustainability, because of course anything could happen in terms of somebody having to go on leave, which of course we hope is not the case. In any case, so that's the reason. Over the course of the 4 weeks, participants, so agency staff, will be in training, both with instructors as well as in small groups, and then doing individual work with their agency team to actually design and prepare the program. So that's why we're saying it's a full-time commitment for the 4 weeks, because you certainly will not be in program with this instructors full-time. That will probably be no more than 10 to 12 hours a week. However, for the balance of the time, you will be designing and then preparing the program based on the templates and the tools that we will be teaching you. And then the other criteria that we're really looking for is our agencies, organizations that have a kind of desire to test new ways of working, and also a desire and a willingness to challenge the status quo and norms related to how we normally do things. Because in many ways we have like both mental models as a field as well as historical practices. And a big part of what we seek to do is test new tools. And that requires a willingness to kind of put some of our old tools aside, or maybe ask some critical questions about how we've done things in the past. I'm just reading the question from Eduardo. Thank you. Is staff available on a full-time basis during those 4 weeks? Okay, perfect. Sorry. Thank you. I answered your question. Great. Outside of the in-class time, which will be structured, so it will be a couple of hours a day for probably 3 or 4 days a week. We're just finalizing the actual schedule, so it will be a standing schedule for the 4 weeks. The time that agency staff do their own work is flexible, of course, but we do anticipate that it's a full-time commitment. So another question came in around monitoring. Would participating agencies have to sign any data sharing related to documents with FirstWork? Yes. You would not be required to share personal identifiers of clients, so related to like personal information, but we would be tracking related to client data. We're basically going to be tracking outcomes, so employment status and retention, as well as wages. The other big piece that we're seeking to track is related to kind of implementation experience. And that's more data and feedback directly from the participating agencies, because that is related to kind of how effective we are with both the train the trainer and the program implementation in your communities. So I'm moving on here. I've already touched on this, but really the goals of Launchpad. So Launchpad itself is 3 weeks. So the structure of the curriculum you will be trained on to deliver with your clients is 3 weeks, with a placement, an employment placement after the fact. That employment placement does not have to be paid. If you're already delivering a program like Youth Job Connection, and that's a component of it, that's okay. We will talk about that in the actual program design, sort of considerations around paying or not paying for work placements. If you have the means to pay and you want to, that's fine, but it's not a requirement if you do not have those means within your programming. But Launchpad itself is 3 weeks structured for participants in cohorts of no more than 15 people. And the goals are really to prepare job seekers, vulnerable job seekers. They do not have to be solely youth. However, if they are, that is okay. But to prepare targeted job seekers with specific in-demand jobs based on feedback and needs from employers, and to specifically build occupation-specific skills and confidence, to increase participants' confidence, self-efficacy, and resilience, both to support them on the job as well as in the future. So to support those sustainable outcomes. To build new habits for clients, as well as to really build on and connect to participants' motivation and goals. And that is a design aspect. And I know some of you or many of you already do this in your programming, really intended to support clients' retention as well as success after the program in employment. And then also to increase participants' self-awareness and self-regulation skills related to habits and patterns, so that they can move successfully towards their goals. So this is the program theory of change, which basically underpins the design of Launchpad. I've already touched on a lot of this, so I'm not going to repeat it. Or repeat it in detail. The dual customer is at the center of it. The rationale for that, in addition to being able to connect people to in-demand jobs, is also a means to address some of the structural barriers that vulnerable people experience in the labor market. So some of those structural barriers may be a requirement for specific education or training, or previous experience, criminal background checks, things like that, as well as in some cases, transportation and other sort of structural barriers in the community or in the region. So the dual customer approach, in addition to just effectively connecting people to jobs, can help us address some of those structural components that we will cover in the program, including tools and ways of working with employers to advance some of those changes for people. The other piece is that simulated, contextualized, and applied occupation-specific training serves to both really effectively prepare people for jobs, so increase their employability because they're being given skills in a very contextualized, sort of real-world way. And that in turn serves to build their confidence and self-efficacy, particularly the applied element. So the more applied and experiential training is, and in many cases, the more rigorous it is, there is a relationship to confidence and self-efficacy for people. Scott, I will get to your question in a second. Thank you for that. So cohort-based programming, I've talked about this in other programming. There's a fair amount of research around the relationship between cohorts, so group programming, especially group programming that have kind of a core element of supportive staff for participants and helping people form new habits and build accountability. So the group plays a big role there. Really having participant goals being built in from the onset, from intake, right throughout a number of exercises, which is kind of core to building and leveraging motivation and supporting that sustained change, because you're really building on participants' kind of core motivations for themselves and the change they seek in their lives. So this is Scott's question around asset and motivation focused narrative. It's really a philosophy that underpins particular practices and tools that participants are skilled, or participants have capacity, participants have skills, and that they're valuable, people in the labor market. So, or that they're valuable people overall, and really comes at the intervention from an asset-based lens. So this also dovetails with the component around high expectations, that there's a belief that participants will be successful. And this belief is based on the fact that we know that they have a lot of capacity and power and skill. So it's kind of a belief that underpins a lot of the processes. And then there will be certain tools like asset inventories and asset mapping that participants do to for themselves identify those skills. But that's kind of a core tenet. Also, again, I mentioned building self-awareness, which is typically the foundation for supporting behavioral change, which is just awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and tying those to specific tools and practices that participants can use to support self-regulation and to respond instead of reacting. The other kind of philosophy that is also a practice with specific tools is a trauma-informed approach. Again, recognizing a lot of the folks we serve have histories of trauma, so that philosophy sort of is the other side of the coin when it comes to high standards. That it is also a flexible approach that seeks to meet people where they are, and really kind of also builds on a practice of empowerment. So helping people, enabling people to do things for themselves versus doing things for them. There's more content about that will be covered in the program. And then we are integrating with a colleague a specific kind of module on the front end, which is also going to be threaded throughout, which dovetails with a trauma-informed approach, which is an awareness and practice related to anti-racism and anti-oppression, recognizing that this is a really big topic and can and should be a topic on its own, or not a topic on its own, a program on its own. We thought this was important for a number of reasons. Among them, many of the, at least in urban areas, the majority of, or a disproportionate number of clients tend to be from communities of color, and also in many cases have experienced oppression and trauma. And the labor market itself also perpetuates and reproduces racist structures. So we know, for example, that women of color are among the poorest people in Canada. And when we look at who is, similarly with COVID, like the demographics of folks who have been most heavily impacted have been people of color. And what jobs people have access to has a lot to do with race and privilege as well. So we're going to cover this as a core component, recognizing that it is a big, it's really a system that permeates everything we do. So the next two slides, and you're going to receive this deck, are kind of two sides of our operational approach. So we have program design, and then we have tools. So in the Train the Trainer, the participants will be trained on both the design, so things like how to design the program, engage with employers, design curriculum, design intake, as well as some of the adult learning best practices and methods, coaching methods, that trauma-informed sort of philosophy and how it informs delivery. So be trained on the design, and then also, as I said earlier, this is supposed to say tools, but we'll be trained on specific tools, so that there will be at least 14 tools that participants will be trained on, and that will include both the use of the tool and the method. So you'll have experience, like you'll have the opportunity to test it on your peers in the group, and then in some cases actually develop it to use it in your program. And then, although we were talking about the 3-week program, we will also focus on post-employment best practices, which include case management and other program components. So although like the majority of what we will do will focus on the 3 weeks, the goal is also to continue to provide support to participants for 12 months after the initial program, pre-employment program. So this is our process, and again, we recognize that it's pretty fast, but we wanted to take advantage of this window of time that we have. So we have an application that's open right now on FirstWorks website. It's pretty straightforward. We wanted to make it as little burden as possible. So the questions all have an objective behind them, really back to those initial criteria that I described. We're not looking for a grant application or anything like that. We know that this is a big commitment of time. So our priority is that the participants who, like the agencies that participate, that this is a right fit for them, that that there's mutually aligned expectations, because it is a big commitment. So we are going to be doing interviews with all of the staff who will be participating, as well as the kind of champion, the executive champion for the agency. So somebody in a leadership position who is committing staff resources and committing to the follow-up and data collection. So we'll do those interviews over Zoom between July 6th to the 9th. So those would be group interviews. And again, somewhat informal, like really seeking to assess and ensure alignment in what the agencies seek to gain, and also an opportunity for us to answer additional questions. And that will be done with myself and a colleague who I'll tell you more about as well. We're gonna make kind of final decisions. Again, looking for between 5 and 10 agencies, so a total of between 10 and 30 individual participants in the program. The actual Train the Trainer 4-week boot camp will start on July 20th and run until August 14th. There will be no training, of course, on the statutory holiday in August. And shortly after that period, like the program delivery will launch, which will really launch with recruitment and intake sometime in mid-August. Again, the expectation is over the course of the 4 weeks, the program itself is being designed or tweaked so that by the time we end the 4 weeks, the participating folks have a program that they're able to largely run with. And then when it comes to curriculum, you'll have a little bit more time over the following 4 weeks from mid-August to mid-September to fine-tune it before your program launches at the end of September. The commitment that we're looking for from all participants, participating agencies, is to test the program once, a minimum of once, with 15 people, so 15 participants. I mean, it really could be between 10 and 15 if your agency has a strong preference for smaller cohorts, but we're suggesting capping it at 15 people. And we are suggesting, we have some timeline criteria related to the funding that's supporting the pilot. So we're suggesting a launch by September 21st. And that process, the recruitment phase and the delivery phase will include ongoing implementation support. So we will have weekly calls, either as a big group or as smaller groups, depending on if there are particular topics, to support your implementation of the program. And then after the program itself launches, we sort of move into a lighter touch implementation support piece. There will be some support available, but really moving into kind of knowledge capture and data collection. I want to emphasize there that our interest is as much on your experience in delivering the program and what you learned from it as it is in collecting the quantitative data. The quantitative data is, of course, important and tells an important story. And there's a lot to learn there, but we believe that your experience and your insight in delivering the program is just as important for our purposes, which is really to seek to scale and to validate what works and to help other groups implement. Is data collection based on our data, or is there a database supplied? No, you do not have to use, thank you, Scott. You do not have to use another database. We would give you a basic form, and we would also work with you just through the program to tweak that process so it is as painless as possible. So you don't have to be putting data into a new database. So this is a little bit about the train the trainer methodology. So yes, there will be technical assistance and coaching for 12 weeks after the boot camp, not 8 weeks, as I said earlier. And this will involve kind of calls on a weekly basis to help you as you are actually implementing after the 4-week period. And the implementation monitoring will last for 12 months. So both on the data collection side, but also in terms of capturing knowledge from you. And I had a slide, sorry, I had some technical challenges before about who would be delivering this. And it may be in another version. So I'm just going to quickly tell you. So the delivery team comprises myself, and my background and expertise is very much in workforce development, design, delivery, and policy. And then the other members of the team have a combined expertise in adult education, social work, and clinical counseling, as well as coaching and somatics. And somatics is a type of therapy that some of you may be familiar with that involves the body, really with a acknowledgement or belief that the body holds trauma and you can kind of move trauma through the body as well. So the two, and actually there's a third person who shares that expertise in terms of adult education, as well as her professional focus is around anti-oppression and anti-racism and working with institutions to address those issues and build capacity. So there are 4 folks on the faculty team, 3 of which are, actually all of which are co-designing this program. And you'll receive information in the actual material related to the theories and the evidence that we're building on. And participants will receive a workbook, which will include all the tools and instruction on how to administer the tools, as well as actual direct training and experience and coaching delivering it. So I'm just looking at questions, and then first work team, if you'd like to open it up to any live questions, that works too. And if we don't get to answering them for some reason today, we can include it in the Q&A that goes out tomorrow. Martha's question, if we were the successful agency, would we be able to promote our organization? Yes. So this is the goal. It's a great question. Thank you. So that is the goal. And part of why this is a pilot is that we want to test it and validate it. So we're both testing the train the trainer methodology, and also the outcomes to a degree. Like, we know that the practices we're going to be training on are evidence-based. So there's a strong evidence base behind your method, but we want to validate the train the trainer approach. But yes is the short answer.
Honestly, and thank you, first of all, Danielle, for going over this, because we're all like, this is ideally where we want to go. And I know our sector as a whole and across our regions have been doing really innovative, really in-depth, like best practice programs, right? But this hopefully Launchpad Train the Trainer, once we get this off the ground, it's just taking us to the next level, right? And with employment transformation and with the idea of getting this out there, being a little bit more focused on the vision that we're trying to achieve. This is hopefully what we're trying to deliver this summer. And again, this is free to our members. I know it takes a lot, and I will say this up front. A lot of investment through in-kind supports through through these organizations, but First Work, we're putting our skin in the game too, because we believe that this is something that will really push the needle. I know, Danielle, you've been answering questions all throughout the presentation, but if there is any person that would like to make any comments or provide their opinion right now, you can either raise your hands and I'll allow you to speak, or you can provide your comments in the chat below. Oh, there we go, Scott. I will. Scott, can you
hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
Perfect. First of all, thanks Akusa and thanks Danielle. This was really, really informative. Now what's the question I had?
You've given us so many. It's really informative. Yeah,
I got it. So
yeah.
there was coaching mentioned a couple of times. So I'm clear that there's coaching by the mentors / facilitators for the participants being trained. Mm-hmm. And are they also taught how to coach to use within the program?
The latter is actually the focus, or that's the connection in the presentation was the latter. So specifically the program, the Train the Trainer, will train participating agency staff on coaching tools and methods to use with their clients.
Awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. Anyone else? Well, I think we're all, that is wonderful. Thank you, Georgina. I think everyone has provided their questions. We'll also be providing you with the deck as well as the video. So we will be sharing this webinar with our members on our members update, and follow up with details on what link to go to and how to apply. Looking forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you again, Danielle.
No problem. And thank you, Koswa and the team from First Work and everyone who joined today. Maybe the only other suggestion would be, if there are questions, you can email First Work. We've pushed the deadline for applying out. It was originally next week, so we've pushed it out to July 3rd, just to basically provide as much time as possible. So if there are questions that weren't answered, and we can maybe ask this in the member update tomorrow, send them in, and then we'll be able to get out answers to you.
There is one question that has come through right now. It's training on dual focus employer part to provide soft skills only, question mark?
No.
This was from okay.
So sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's it. That's you answered it, because they just responded, but they just asked a quick question. It's like, is it only soft skills? Essentially is what they're asking.
Yeah. It's to prepare people for the needs of particular employers and potentially industries, depending on the approach. It's often industry focused, definitely occupation focused. So typically it's occupation specific knowledge, technical skills, and then contextualized soft skills. So the emphasis on soft skills is just that, and this is also a best practice, that soft skills are often most effective when they're delivered in an applied way, based on the needs and practices of a particular industry. So you can kind of integrate the soft skills with the technical skills, but it would be really form follows function. So based on the needs of the industry would influence the content or the curriculum, although our focus will be on applied training.
Perfect. One more question, Danielle. Can the TNT participants be different than the staff delivering the actual program in full?
It's a good question. I think there should be some overlap at minimum. My strong suggestion, if you want to have someone in the TNT that's not going to be delivering the program, that you have 3 agency staff participate, so that you give, if at all possible, the opportunity for staff who will be delivering the opportunity to participate. And I say that largely because so much of it is about the delivery. Like so much of the program, the train the trainer, is about delivery. And of course, the actual outcomes for clients, the folks who are delivering programs have such a big impact there. I'm just looking at Rebecca's question.
Yes.
Will the delivery with clients be blended online and in class? Thank you for that question. Because I did not talk about it. So yes, the program, like Launchpad, will be, you can deliver it online solely or blended or in person. So it's basically, you can adapt it. So depending on where we are in September with COVID and in your communities, you can take the program and you can deliver it solely online, and we will train you for that delivery method. You could also take the program and you could deliver it in a classroom, or a combination, or a blended approach to your question. So yes.
One more. Can it be adapted into an existing program like YJC, or can it be a brand new program?
So great question. Thank you. And both is the answer. So we, as Akoso has said, and we're very mindful, which is part of why, among the reasons we're doing the interviews, we're mindful that this is a big commitment and a big resource commitment in terms of staff time, because we're essentially saying, like, let's test this new thing without new government dollars or without, core funding to support it. So we anticipate that you're going to be using your existing resources to do it. So certainly you could use YJC resources and adapt it, adapt kind of what you do in YJC, or you can blend or use other resources that you have from other funding sources. The caveat would be kind of that first point around being willing to sort of challenge historical ways of doing things. So we certainly want to build on your wisdom and the existing best practices that we know. I mean, several of you that I actually talked to last week in the focus groups, which were great, shared those practices. So we want you to build on what works, but not feel married to rules or practices that don't work. And then the other requirement is that it is 3 weeks. So that the participants get 3 weeks of pre-employment, and that the intake process is based on industry need, based on client participant goals and motivation, which will all be pieces that we train you on.
There's 2 more questions. One is the actual program intended for youth only or adult population as well?
So both, not youth only, although it can be delivered for a youth only demographic. Like if, for example, you were adapting YGC or that was your agency's mandate or program mandate. So these best practices, and this again will be supported in the research that you get in the program, apply to almost all demographics. So there are some, I'd say, elements that are kind of more applicable for youth, like when it comes to self-determination and participants kind of influencing their learning path. Like that's definitely a youth best practice, but it also actually applies to older workers as well. Certainly the dual customer model or sector specific, depending on your terminology, does apply to both youth and to older workers.
And sorry, yeah, no, it's perfect. And honestly, I reiterate that because given COVID recovery and everything that's happening, it's not just affecting youth. I mean, youth severely, but others as well. So being able to adapt to both makes sense. I think the last question for the day is the placement component strictly on one employer for all 15 participants, or can it be multiple employers since the program is sector based?
For sure. Great question. So our assumption is that it would be multiple employers, just because having one employer that can support 15 people, it tends to be rare, even in big cities prior to COVID. And usually the best practice or among the philosophies with sector specific, and we aren't saying that you have to be sector specific. We're going to talk about the design of dual customer and, focusing on an occupation versus a sector, but there's definitely an argument for a sector specific approach. Part of that design approach is that you work with multiple employers specifically, so that your curriculum, your approach is based on the needs of a group and not just one employer. So all this to say, it could be one or it could be many, and we would talk about the sort of considerations on the front end of the program.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much again, Danielle. I know it's 2:00, so people are starting to head to their next meetings. So thank you again, everyone. We will be sending the deck as well as some of the questions that have been answered. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Danielle. Goodbye.